Good evening, everybody. Welcome to That's Wild. Good evening, everybody. Very excited to have you with us tonight on That's Wild show. My name is Gareth Poole, and tonight we have an incredibly exciting show focusing mainly on the vultures of Africa. It was International Vulture Day yesterday, and we are very excited to share with you that tonight we will be airing a little bit later in the show a very interesting interview that Brent had with John Davies from the Endangered Wildlife Trust. John leads up he's the manager rather of the Birds of Prey project for the Endangered Wildlife Trust, the EWT, who Painted Dog work very closely with, and we're very, very excited about that. Vultures are such an important part of our ecosystem, and so we are going to be focusing on this incredible species throughout the show tonight. And of course, before we get into that, what we're also looking forward to is the highlights of the last little while. We've had some incredible moments in the last sort of 2 weeks on our live safaris. And of course, if you have missed out on these incredible moments, please remember to join us on these live safaris. Join the pack as well. So if you download the Painted Dog TV app, you can join us, join the pack, and be able to interact with myself, with Brent, with Andrew on these private live safaris. An amazing insight into the wildlife behavior here on the Rietspruit Game Reserve. So please join us on these live safaris. But let's get right into these highlights, some incredible moments that have been happening over the last little while. And I believe that the first highlight that we'll be showing you tonight was an incredible moment that Brent captured in one of the larger water holes on the reserve, the southern part of the reserve, one of my favorites. And of course, this incredible scene played out in front of Brent, and I believe Andrew was with him on this particular game drive. Absolutely amazing to watch our resident herd of elephant swimming and playing. It's got really hot at this time of the year. We've just hit spring and the temperatures have climbed, and so the elephants will now start to swim a lot more regularly. And just amazing. Look at this. Just having the time of their lives. Such special moments. That looks like, yes, look at that. Look at the little calf climbing up on, I presume its mother, having just the best time in the water. Can just imagine how relieving that is for such a large animal with such a massive surface area of skin. They absorb a lot of heat during the day in this hot African sun. So one of the ways that they cool themselves down is by swimming like this. So special. I'm a little bit jealous that I wasn't there, to be honest. It's been a while since I've seen our resident herd swimming like this and playing in the water. Also having a drink. Make sure that you get your daily liquid intake. And then there was a very interesting moment that happened towards the end of the sighting. The bull, the large bull that's in must, still in must by the way today, came into this sighting, and as you can see, the herd is reacting. They started moving away from the bull. They get a little bit spooked by him at the moment because he's in must. He's quite pushy every time he reconnects with the herd. And they're obviously quite mindful of the little calf and trying to protect it. And they came rushing right up towards the vehicle. They're now literally just 10 yards in front of Brent in the little jackal. And they actually, I think, sprayed some water on the guys while they were filming them. Just the most amazing sighting. We are absolutely privileged and spoilt with amazing moments with this herd of elephant, all of which have been recently released onto the Rietspruit Game Reserve. That's the younger of the two bulls, I think, just playing with Brent there. Incredible. Very, very special moment that. And certainly always a highlight when you spend time with these amazing African giants. And right, so moving into the next exciting highlight. I think the next one was myself on Game Drive. We were out tracking lions and came across 2 of the 3 male lions in the resident coalition. And we had an amazing moment with them roaring for us again right next to the vehicle. They were a mere sort of 6 or 7 yards from us when they started roaring, and it was certainly a highlight. Always is. Never a dull moment. Just listen to them roaring now, everybody. Wow, unbelievable. Even sitting here watching it again now in the highlights, you know, those moments spent with those boys roaring like that are absolutely phenomenal. I quite love the part where his brother actually started roaring whilst he was still lying down on his side. So minimum effort then turned into maximum effort. But what an incredible sound, and such a privilege for us to be able to be that close to them while they're roaring. Yeah, it's, like I said earlier, it's something that never gets old. You know, I've been doing this 13 years professionally, and I still get a smile on my face like a little child every time I sit with those lions roaring like that. A very, very special moment indeed. Right, so then moving into our next highlight that happened recently, we had a close-up encounter, Brent did at least, with the large elephant bull, who, as mentioned, is still in must. Now, you must remember, of course, everybody, that Brent and I have lots of experience with elephants. We've been guiding with elephants all across Africa, and we understand their behavior really, really well. And we will then sometimes get relatively close to these animals, obviously reading their behavior and reacting to whatever they're doing. And we just always try and ask folks who don't maybe have that much experience to maybe just, you know, step a little bit further back when you're viewing the elephants anywhere, and just in particular these bulls when they're in must, because they can be a little bit aggressive, a little bit show-offy. You can see that here now. Look at that amazing moment. Came right up to Brent. Brent, you can see, just banged twice on the bonnet of the vehicle, which clearly sent him hightailing. We don't want him to touch the vehicle, and we ask that, you know, anybody that's viewing elephants, regardless of who you are, who your experience is, please just remember to be very safe with elephants. Give them their space. If they come toward you, just let them know that you're there, and keep them away from the vehicles. But amazing moment, and yeah, I'm sure Brent's blood pressure went up a little bit there. Very, very cool. All right, moving into the next highlight then was certainly my highlight of the week. I actually wasn't there, but I've watched this clip several times. An amazing moment that played out with some of the white rhino that we have here on the reserve, and this was relatively close to our headquarters where this particular scene played out. I think Brent captured this moment on a live safari, where you can see the big bull at the back of picture here coming in towards a cow and her calf. The calf, being the one closest to us in the picture, is probably about 2.5 years old and still with its mother. Look at this amazing moment where they actually, I think they touch one another here. So really smelling each other out. And what the bull is doing is he is trying to court this female. Quite clearly she was in estrus, so he was spending quite a bit of time staying close to her and trying to court her. He'll always then try and push the calf away to try and then have his time alone with the mother, with the adult cow. Fascinating behavior here, something that I've never personally witnessed. That is the calf, everybody, that you can see lying down. It was just resting in the shade. Now, clearly the bull is frisky. He knows that the cow's in estrus, and he's got one thing on his mind, and he actually trapped this calf. You can see him. Look at this. It's just amazing. So you can hear the squeals of the calf, obviously under the pressure of this big bull. Quite a scary moment. bull was clearly confused here. He's picking up all the pheromones and the scent of the cow that's in estrus. He saw that youngster lying down and mounted that youngster, the poor thing. Fortunately, no injury, and the calf managed to stand up and get away from the bull. And you can now see him resting his head on the back of the adult cow. Fortunately, the cow is now out of picture, has moved away from this scene, and now the amazing moment that we captured on film of the two rhino actually mating. And I believe this went on for a good 40-45 minutes that they were copulating. So it takes a long time, and just imagine the pressure of that big heavy bull. You can actually see him shaking there, clearly getting quite excited as he was doing the deed. Absolutely amazing moment to be captured on film. It doesn't get seen all that often, folks, I assure you. I've only ever seen rhinos mating once before in the wild. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable scenes here on the Rietspruit Game Reserve. So, yeah, wow. Just amazing to have captured all of that with those rhino. You know, the initial sort of courting period, which may have actually gone on for longer than when we first discovered them. It can take a couple of days before that bull has actually encouraged the female to mate with him. But amazing to see that brief coming together of the bull and the cow, where they touched mouths like that, busy smelling each other. And then, of course, obviously he won her over. And then that scary moment, obviously, with the bull then mounting the calf that was resting in the shade. Again, obviously, fortunately, nothing came of it. Amazing sounds as well. To hear those high-pitched squeals from the calf, sounds that you don't get to hear all that often. And what you don't expect as well from such a massive prehistoric animal. And then, of course, you know, it all culminating in the mating at the end. And the exciting future that brings for our rhino population here on the Rietspruit Game Reserve. As we all know, they are a really vulnerable species in terms of their numbers because of the poaching crisis. So that's, you know, massive hope for a new calf to be entering our world here on the Rietspruit Reserve. So we're very, very excited about that. All right, everybody. We are going to be heading into a short ad break shortly, but really, really awesome highlights there. Please remember to join us on our live safaris, and we will be right back with you all very, very soon.
Very spoilt here on the Rietspruit Reserve.
How awesome is that, guys? Right past the front of our truck. Look at that, everybody. They are just unreal. Welcome back, everybody. Very excited to have shared those amazing moments on our highlights reel with you this week. Just again, reminding everybody, tune in. Come and join me on a safari. Come and join Brent on the safaris here on the Rietspruit Game Reserve. They truly are phenomenal, and we can't wait to share it with all of you. Now, as promised before, we had an interview recorded earlier this week where Brent went and sat down with John Davies to discuss the birds of prey program that he is working on with the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and specifically vultures in this area, and what programs he's been working on. And we are going to take you straight into this amazing interview. Enjoy all of it.
We're sitting here in an absolutely spectacular spot on the junction of the Blyde and Olifants River. Now, both these rivers are very important for the animal that we're going to be talking about today. And sitting next to me is John Davies from the Endangered Wildlife Trust and the Vulture Project.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. It's always lucky to catch up a little bit. And as you were saying, perfect setting. I know it's a bit hard to see behind us, but yeah, we've got a couple of whiteback vultures breeding in the trees there. If you sit here long enough, you'll see a pair of hoodeds going in there. So yeah, having these amazing riparian forests is quite a rare thing these days. So nice to have.
And very, very important for vultures in general.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very species specific. But if we're talking about hooded vultures, for example, within South Africa, that's a species with a very small population. So about 100 to 200 adult birds throughout the country. So it is very, very low density, and they specialize in these riparian forests. So whiteback vultures, you'll see the typical nests out on game drives or safari drives, up in the top of the knobthorn scattered around. But with the hoodeds, they're always tucked away, especially jackalberries, matumis, these sort of dense canopy structures. So yeah, when you start losing these forests through flood damage or disturbance, it is pretty critical. You definitely lose a significant chunk of breeding habitat.
And of course, we are talking about vultures, not only the hoodeds, but the whitebacks, the capes and everything. And we are facing almost a crisis at the moment throughout Africa, not only in South Africa with vultures.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it is. Well, I mean, it is called the African vulture crisis. So to give a little bit of a background story about why to us this is such a significant risk or potential concern is, besides the rate that we're losing the birds currently, if you look at India as a case study, in the 80s and 90s, they went through a huge decline where most of their populations dropped to 2% of what they were within the space of 15 or 20 years. So as a species, just their mobility and their ability to move around over vast distances does put them at a high risk compared to mammals, which you have a little bit more control about movements. So looking at that as a case study of what might actually happen in Africa it's quite alarming. But yeah, I mean, if you're talking about whiteback vultures, critically endangered as a species, hooded vultures, critically endangered, lappet-face are endangered, white-headed vultures, critically endangered. Cape vultures, interestingly enough, are the only species that's actually on a slow path to recovery in South Africa.
And they were the ones from the sort of 70s, 80s that were in the most trouble.
Yeah, that was sort of the poster child of vulture conservation back in the day. So it gives us a lot of confidence and a bit of hope as well to show that if enough effort is put in, you can actually achieve something out of this. It's not, I think with conservation, it's easy to go down that negative slope of, like, oh, what's the point? Will it actually make a difference? But it is very encouraging having this case study and going, well, there was a huge amount of effort and still a huge amount of effort going in. And we are seeing some of these populations recovering. I mean, next week we'll be up in Lowveld Nature Reserve in Limpopo, and that's got about 1,300 pairs of Cape vultures now. So that's about 25% of the global population in one reserve, and increasing. So yeah, it is encouraging in some ways.
And what are the biggest threats facing vultures currently?
So obviously it's going to vary a little bit according to where you are in the species, but by far the biggest threat, and the one we focus on the most, is wildlife poisoning. It's not just linked to vultures, but that is by far the biggest declines. But linear infrastructure is also a massive issue to us. Obviously power line collisions and electrocutions are a very regular occurrence. I mean, yesterday we got a report for Baluli Nature Reserve of another whiteback vulture there, and sadly an adult bird. So when you think this time of year, middle of the breeding season, it is risky, because then that impact of also losing the chick, obviously having a pair, raising the chick together. If you lose one early in the breeding cycle, there is a reasonable chance the chick will be abandoned. But that is a significant threat. If you're moving into more arid zones, then farm drownings, reservoirs, on private farms, cattle farms, sheep farms, etc., are a bit of a factor. Not just for vultures, other birds of prey as well, and general wildlife really. But I would say wildlife poisoning is always the one thing that we really come back to, that we look at in terms of what's potentially driving a species to extinction. That's the one that will do that.
And obviously the poisonings are not species specific, because you poison, you're going to get a whole bunch of species. But they are targeted at vultures and lions, particularly at the moment.
Yeah, so it's a bit variable again regionally as to what the main targets are. So I mean, the drivers are are quite interesting to understand. Often it's not very clear when we first arrive at a poisoning scene and you're trying to kind of put two and two together. But one of the big things that we see in our part of the country at the moment is obviously the threat to lions and hyena. So the lion bone trade really seems to be on the uptake at the moment, and vultures are often just the bycatch. Sadly, the birds that get there first, they find the carcasses very efficiently compared to any mammals. So even though a poacher might only be targeting 1 or 2 lions or maybe a hyena, you might at the same time get 50 or 100 vultures that all get killed at the same scene, even though it's essentially almost waste. It's not really the targeted species. If you're going further down into KwaZulu-Natal and then other parts of Africa, then vulture body parts are still used for traditional medicine fairly regularly. KwaZulu-Natal, probably the majority of the poisonings are linked to that. So there we see a lot of vulture heads cut off at a poisoning site, whereas up here we do get it, but it's fairly scarce. Maybe 1 in 10 incidents, 1 in 10 or 15 or so. Yeah.
And I mean, I know you tirelessly driving around massive distances to check on your birds. And if you do find a poisoned vulture, there is hope sometimes for some of them. I mean, there is
100%.
medicine that can be.
Yeah, so we're in a positive position in the Lowveld, and this is something that we're trying to expand now. So in the last year or so, we've been trying to work a lot more with a big veterinary team and rehabilitation centers and building a little network. I mean, we jokingly call our little group the Vulture Bomb Squad because it's all the guys that get called in when there's not really much of an option left. But in terms of the treatment, it's actually surprisingly effective. Our last 3 incidents have had 100% survival in terms of birds that were still alive on scene. So our biggest shortcoming at the moment is just finding the scenes fast enough and getting there rapidly. But it makes a huge difference. And the treatment's it's not particularly complicated, which is an advantage. If you obviously snare injuries, etc., it might be tough on mammals and there might be some follow-up work required. With vultures, we need to house them for about 2 weeks just to make sure they've recovered properly, but you'll be astonished. You'll have a bird that literally won't lift its head. It appears dead, and within 2 days, it'll be trying to take your arm off. So it's amazing seeing that quick rate of recovery. So it's also encouraging, actually.
So you've been mentioning some of your projects, but you've got other projects to help mitigate things like electrocutions and that. And that is something our viewers out there in South Africa might come across if they find a vulture under power lines or whatnot. So what can they do to help in those situations?
So it's an interesting one because the Endangered Wildlife Trust has been working on this for a very long time now. So one of our departments works very closely with Eskom on electrocutions and collisions in particular. And this is not just restricted to birds of prey. I mean, we kind of get called out to giraffe that have electrocuted themselves on transformers and all kinds of weird and wonderfuls. But if anybody sees any sort of wildlife that they kind of feel was impacted by a power line, they are more than welcome to get in touch. I mean, jump on our website, find contact details, and all that we really need is a photo to prove that there's the animal either injured or dead, usually dead, found under the lines. And then also, if you have a look at the closest pole numbers, just photograph, there'll be like a little plaque in most of the wooden poles, or in the large structures, it's written on a little board there. Photograph that with a GPS location. And if that goes through to us, we essentially log that as an incident with Eskom, and then they commit to actually coming out. We do a site inspection alongside with them, and we decide what's the best course of action in terms of mitigation. So it's a slow process. It's not an easy one. It's not always as fast as we want it to happen, depending on the species, but especially with threatened species like vultures, there's usually a very good response. So it might vary. I'm sure a lot of people in the country would have seen those sort of yellow flappers hanging on the lines, very common to see. Little things like transformer boxes where you get the jumper cables coming out, insulating those so that it's not exposed wire. So it's fairly simple strategies, but the more we know about these incidents, the more we can focus our efforts in the areas where it's more of a concern than others. Another aspect, which it's a little bit more of a far-reaching project, and it's a project that's going to take a very long time. I mean, we've kind of committed to 10, 20 years minimum for some of these regions, is what we call our Raptor Safe Zone project. So the idea is that with the species we work on, even the Kruger Park is almost not big enough to conserve vultures by itself. As much effort as we put in there, it doesn't help if surrounding areas have a lot of threats and the birds float in and out, like we said earlier. So with the Raptor Safe Zone project, the long-term vision is to work with private landowners. So if anybody has particularly game farms, any properties like that with sort of natural space still on it, is we kind of go into a collaboration with them. We'll assess the property, see if there's anything from our perspective that's a concern from, any threats to birds of prey, and then generate a mitigation report. From there, we kind of go through whatever might have to be done. Like if there is unsafe energy infrastructure, that's a concern. If there's a road that goes through, a breeding area, disturbing nest sites, then we'll work with the landowner to preferentially only use that road seasonally, for example, would be an easy solution. Moving away from lead-free ammunition, or at least reducing the exposure of lead to scavenging birds of prey is a biggie. And then also, if there are wildlife poisoning events, there is having a protocol in place on how to respond and reduce that as much as possible. And once we've kind of achieved all of that per property, that then becomes a section of the Raptor safe zone.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's a bit of a daunting undertaking, I've got to be honest. We did an interesting publication a bit over a year ago with a lot of people throughout Africa on mostly whiteback vulture tracking data, and the minimum size targets we need to aim for is 2.1 million hectares per region to make it feasible. But that's where, for example, the APNR, you're already sitting with over 200,000 hectares, just with 4 properties, 4 or 5 areas that are already interested in achieving this and are already protecting birds of prey. So it does help. You have your big stepping stones, and then you got the problem kids where you put a little bit more effort. There's always going to be a few properties where you require a bit more effort. But yeah, piecing it all together also just brings a bit of attention to the threats. Birds are... I understand they're not everybody's favorites always. Everyone thinks of Africa and they think of, lions and hyenas and, elephants, etc., rhino, whereas the birds always kind of, we feel, they're a little bit in the background there, whereas, the way I see it, it really is the other way around. Start with a small species and work up. But yeah, it just kind of gets a little bit of publicity out there for them as well.
So of course your project's not only based in South Africa, you also operate in Mozambique. Now, I mean, from the two different areas obviously pose different challenges. Could you let us know a little bit about the challenges in South Africa and in Mozambique?
Yeah, so I mean, every country comes with its own unique situation, and it is quite interesting. March, April, we're in Mozambique training with the Mozambican Wildlife Alliance veterinarians there, an amazing team. I can't say enough good things about them. But then we look at our Hoedspruit area where we're based now, and there's 14, 16 veterinarians within an hour's drive of us. It's a bit crazy. They, at that point, had 6 for the entire country focusing on wildlife. So yeah, like one of the veterinarians heading up to Nyasa, he's got a 5 million hectare area by himself. So you think about the logistics surrounding that, it's completely different ballgame. So, when we're responding to things here, it's fairly straightforward. We have a couple of people that can assist in response. A lot of the reserves have staff that can help us out in terms of actually getting in the field and scouring an area, looking for any surviving birds and managing the crime scene afterwards. Whereas there, kind of the protocol is basically get a helicopter and 1 veterinarian and 1 pilot, and yeah, just do whatever you can. But in remote areas, it is a challenge. I mean, literally 2 minutes before we started this interview, we just had an immobility alert from one of our tracking units on the birds in Mozambique, and it's a big challenge trying to make sure somebody can reach these areas, far off roads. Sometimes you might be in a dense area, so even with a helicopter, getting somebody onto the ground isn't always practical. And if you do get there and you have 50 or 100 live birds, managing that it's a very, very different situation to us. It makes us realize we're a bit spoiled in terms of what we have with resources around us. Yeah.
And obviously the tracking collars are incredibly important in alerting you to things that are happening.
Yeah.
I think you brought some collars along.
Yeah, I mean, we can chat about, I brought a couple of different types that we can chat about. I mean, technology for what we do is becoming a massive part of our program. Just considering these animals move over vast distances. I mean, to put it in perspective, we had a Cape vulture that we released that had a broken wing. So after surgery, its first day, it flew 550 kilometers, day after release. So it went from Dahlstrom till western side of Pilanesberg by the afternoon. So you kind of think, all right, if you're working with rhino or elephant, you have your focal area, you can put your resources there. But for us, it's a very different situation. So, I mean, these are just a couple of options of the type of tracking technology that we're using. So in remote areas, these are satellite units.
And all solar powered.
Yeah, no, we're fortunate compared to the mammal guys. They're slowly catching up now. But yeah, we've been saying to them for years, switch to solar. But yeah, these are fantastic. And
weigh nothing.
Yeah, about 40 grams. So we are restricted, same with mammals, in terms of the weight that you can put on an animal. So with birds, The absolute maximum is 3% of the body weight. We aim for less than 1.5. So these are about 35 grams approximately. Most of the units will be around that. And a nice adult whiteback vulture is about 5 kilograms, just over. So these will basically global coverage, obviously, which is lovely. And this is kind of the thing that we really need in remote areas, you know, where there might not be cell phone signal or any other option. So fantastic for that. But you have the limitation in terms of how much data it can send. So we get a location every half an hour. That's about what it can handle. Then we're testing out, you obviously know Louis van Schalkwyk.
Very well.
And the guys from the Max Planck Institute. So
yeah.
with them, we're testing out some of the Sigfox technology. The idea is it's much lower cost units. There's already a lot of towers, and yeah, hopefully getting more coverage from repeater pucks under aircraft will mean that going forward we have great coverage on these. And yeah,
we're actually looking at helping Louis add another tower up into Kruger.
Yeah. So yeah, well, so those towers are pretty valuable because I mean, with the birds, it drives us insane. But they are a perfect candidates in terms of being up in the air, so we get good data downloads. But again, our risk is, you know, if there's a poisoning in a little drainage line, you know, behind this ridge here, and you're out of signal, obviously a bit of a concern. And then for more behavioral type of studies, then we'll start focusing more on GSM tracking units, typical cell phone networks. Just the volume of data is ridiculous. So these are, I mean, probably some of the top units in the world. Those will do 1 second resolution when they're going at full tilt. So when there's enough power in the battery, and it's not unusual to get over 10 to 20,000 locations a day, or for these tracking units.
We'll have to speak to VM to figure out how to put a camera on one.
Yeah, that'll be quite an interesting approach. But these are, they're incredible actually in terms of different projects. So, I mean, we actually have some of these on hooded vultures with the wild dogs.
Yes.
Trying to kind of like understand the interactions between the two species. Obviously, I know, you know, Painted Dog, as the name implies, has done tons of work on the wild dogs. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. We need to get a couple more. I think we got 3 or 4 more birds to go for that project. But yeah, just understand that sort of reliance that they have on wild dog dens, which makes perfect sense. You know, the denning season, same to the breeding season. So
I was sitting in a wild dog den on Wednesday, and at the den, there were 3 hooded sitting in the tree.
They're always hanging around. So yeah, as I say, but from that perspective, I mean, technology to us is massive. So yeah, all the tracking units these days, sadly, we have to have mortality sensors in them. And as soon as something goes wrong, we get a WhatsApp alert on the phone. Well, there's quite a few of us on the systems per region, and it just kind of tells you, there's the last GPS coordinates, please check out this bird, there might be a problem. Now and then you get a false alert, but it at least puts it on people's radar.
Exactly.
And then we can accelerate the response, because what's happened in the past as often is people find an old poisoning scene, maybe 6 months old, and basically you end up counting the number of skulls to try and understand. And that's what we're trying to move away from. Stopping these poisonings from happening completely is going to be incredibly difficult, but if we can accelerate the response time, then you go from losing 20 birds as a max compared to what it used to be 100 to 200 potentially. So yeah.
Wow, absolutely amazing. I mean, obviously everything is connected out here, and so protecting vultures ends up protecting wild dogs, protecting lions, and the greater ecosystem. And I think that's the amazing thing, is that a lot of people here work together. I know you work with the carnivore guys, because obviously,
of course.
So it's absolutely incredible. And I mean, a massive thank you to the work that you guys do. It's absolutely incredible, and we look forward to supporting you further. Hopefully we can do some fun things in the future.
Absolute pleasure. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I think it'll be a couple of days in the field to come, man.
Cheers, thanks so much.
Appreciate it, man. Cheers.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you all enjoyed that incredible interview with John Davies and Brent. I certainly have learned so much from John and so excited to try and get involved more with vulture conservation. I was just actually discussing with guests this morning, how many white-backed vulture nest sites we found on our morning safari. There are certainly an abundance of them nesting on this Rietspruit Game Reserve, and it's very positive to see that, and we, obviously will try our very best to conserve the vultures in our immediate reserve, but obviously all the surrounding reserves. And just fascinating to hear about all that incredible technology that is providing so much data on movements of these birds and also ways to better conserve them and protect them. And talking about conserving and protecting vultures, we had an amazing moment not too long ago where an incident occurred right here at HQ, at Painted Dog HQ, where a bird actually ended up in our reservoir, and we were alerted to it by our pack members that were watching a camera that was set up at this waterhole. And we just want to share that amazing scenario with you all very quickly. So we're going to go straight into that right now.
Something happened this morning. We were notified from some of our viewers that there was a bird trapped in the reservoir. As soon as we heard this, we rushed over, and it turned out to be a juvenile white-backed vulture that had unfortunately fallen in. When we got to it, I ran and got leather gloves, put them on, and ran as quick as I could to go and save it from the water.
Is it alive?
Already trying to bite. What do you think the best bet is? Just leave him in the sun for a bit. Yeah, probably. We brought it back to the house, we lay it in the sun, and then we let it rest, try to give it some water. It didn't want water, and eventually after almost 4 hours he finally decided that he was ready to run off and be free once again.
Wow, what an amazing moment that was, everybody. Just so sad that bird, ended up injuring its wing and landing in our reservoir, but really grateful to the team here that they managed to react quickly and get, in touch with Moholo Holo and get that bird safely to that rehabilitation center. I can give you an update that sadly that bird's wing was not repairable and is broken, and unfortunately, that bird will live out its days in that rehab center. But yeah, everything was done to try and rescue that bird, and so much more can be done to rescue more of these birds. And I'll just touch on again what John had brought up in his interview about these power line strikes or any incidents that are reported with birds. Please do your very best to share that with the EWT. If you go onto their website, John explained it, it's very, very simple. If you see a power line strike and you find a bird, take a photograph of that bird, share the location. If you can find that ID plaque that's put on the pole, find that, photograph it, share that information so that we can get to that bird as fast as possible, and also just record that data even if the bird is deceased. So very, very important that we work as best as we can, everybody, to try and conserve these incredible birds, this amazing species. Now, another amazing moment that we managed to capture, a very exciting and happy moment that we managed to capture recently, was a release of a number of vultures at Moholo Holo These birds were, well, 8 of the 11 birds released on the day were actually poisoned victims, and John touched on how the medicines are there to treat these birds and safely release them back into the wild, and this is such a success. You'll see the footage now as they empty bring the cages from the vulture ambulance, as they like to call it, an amazing mobile unit that has been created to tend to these vulture incidents. Each of these birds get their own separate compartments so that they don't disturb one another, and all of the medical equipment is on board on that vehicle. And you can see everybody from the Endangered Wildlife Trust in Moholoholo working together to put these birds down on the ground. And just amazing that, from such a shocking, dire situation where you think these birds are done for and are not going to make it, to, as John said, have such an incredible speed of recovery. It was probably only 2 weeks after the incident that these birds were released. And it's just amazing. If we all work together and, report these incidents, we can actually start saving these birds with the medicine, with the hardworking people from these organizations that basically give up their lives just to protect vultures. It's incredible. Here we go. I think this is when they released them. Look at that. What a special moment. Unbelievable. I think the birds you saw taking off there, everybody, were all white-backed vultures, and you can actually see them then flying up and joining a thermaling group of vultures above them, and straight back to business, heading out, going to go and search for carrion, for carcasses. And such a success story, and these success stories can keep happening if we all work together. It's not difficult. All you need to do is stop your car and take a couple of photographs and share that information, either with us or more directly with the Endangered Wildlife Trust. Very, very special, very, very cool moment. I'm glad that we were there to film that. All right. So another very interesting little bit of news that popped up recently that we discovered was that the Luanda National Park in Malawi also recently recorded an Egyptian vulture, the first ever recording of that species in Malawi, and that's pretty exciting news. So it just shows you that these efforts from the conservation organizations are clearly working. Egyptian vultures are critically endangered, and to have now discovered the first one in Malawi is pretty damn exciting. So hopefully more and more success will come as far as we can make it happen. We just all need to do our very best to conserve a species that is often forgotten in the world of conservation crisis that we face at the moment, but vultures are, as we know, very critically important. Right, and next, I have forgotten. What do I have to say next? I have to make something up and go to an ad. Okay, all right. So, everybody, that's all I have to say now, apparently. We are going to go to a short ad break. We will see you very soon.
Dear future filmmakers, Africa is calling. It's time to reawaken your wild. Painted Dog TV is offering an internship unlike any other. Join our pack and see the world through a whole new lens. Live and work in the beating heart of the South African bush and become part of our mission to share it with the world. For the love of wildlife. For the storytellers of our future. Painted Dog TV internships.
Welcome back, everybody. Very excited for the next part of our show. We now go into the pack photos and videos section, where some of our pack members have submitted some of their favorite photos and videos of wildlife that they've captured either on a previous safari or just from home. And let's get straight into the first one. This one was submitted by Regular. Oh wow, very cool. Look how cute that little lioness is. I see that Regular has said here the youngest Avoca BDM, I assume maybe Black Dam daughter, and her mom right before she was introduced to her dad and uncles. Such an incredible moment to capture on film there, Regular. That's very, very cool. Obviously quite a scary moment for that lioness, you know, introducing that little cub to the pride. I'm sure it's quite an anxious moment, but a great photograph, very well captured. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Right, and the next picture I think was from Deneen, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, indeed. It is a grey-headed bushshrike. Look at the colours on that bird, everybody. Ridiculous. And, even more ridiculous, it's prey. Such an amazing shot. And I assume, Deneen, that was from your backyard in the village here in the Rietspruit Wildlife Estate. So really, really special wildlife right here on our doorstep sometimes. And yes, indeed, feeding on a yellow-bellied sand snake. Amazing that a bird that size is feeding on a snake that size. How on earth does it dispatch that thing? I assume breaks it up into little pieces. I'm not sure. But very, very awesome photograph. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Hope you don't mind me looking at my lap, everybody. I'm just looking at the photos in closer detail. Joyce sent us a photograph of a white-tailed fawn. Now, I've never seen one of those before in my life, but that is a cool photograph. And again, in her backyard. Amazing, Joyce. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. You've actually framed it really, really well. I like the foliage around the edges, and I see there's a little bit of a hook there. I'm assuming that might be where you hang some lanterns. Very, very cool photo. Moving on to the next one. This one was from Betty, I believe, of a dwarf mongoose. I mentioned the mongoose living in the old termite mounds, so I hunted for a photo. Camp Marimi in Botswana. Oh wow, that is a cool photo. I'm assuming early morning, just poking their heads out as the sun starts to rise. As we know, these mongoose are lazy risers in the morning. They wait for the sun to come up. Certainly who I could imagine being in my next life. Take life easy in the morning. But very cool shot of that one mongoose. I'm just having a look at that top hole. There's not one sticking its head out there. Amazing moment with that mongoose just starting to get going with its morning activity. Right, moving on to the next one. This one was sent in from Shelley of a gopher tortoise. Again, species I didn't even know existed. Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge in Florida, USA. That is a very, very handsome tortoise. I definitely need to do more homework on the tortoise species that occur outside of Africa. Very cool shot. I assume, though, quite an old individual, judging by the smooth carapace and the, the segments that are missing at the back end of its shell. Very cool photo. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. Right, the next one of my favorite species on Earth, a black rhino that was sent in by Julie. Such a cool shot. Feeding this beautiful black rhino when I was volunteering at Care for Wild Rhino Sanctuary. That must have been quite an amazing time spent there, Julie. I just love this species. Look at that hooked lip, everybody. Very, very distinctively different to the white rhino. We saw the white rhino earlier in our show with that big, wide, square, flat mouth, and so different to the hook-lipped rhino, its true name. That's a very cool shot. Thank you for sharing that with us, Julie. Very, very cool indeed. Amazing photos this week, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. And please, everybody, continue to share your photographs with us. We love seeing your photos, and we love talking about them and sharing them with the world. and job well done. Thank you for those who have shared them with us, and we look forward to some more. Right, so the next part of the show, I believe, if I've got this right, is story time. And I have a very cool story to tell you about. It's slightly sad, but an interesting one nonetheless, of a sighting that I had in 2011, if I remember correctly, on a property that I was working on. I was guiding some guests. I'd only been guiding for about a year at that time, so was still pretty inexperienced. And myself and my tracker went out on a game drive. We were driving along the Timbavati River, and we noticed a large group of vultures that were resting in the tops of the trees, the jackleberries, on either side of this prominent riverbed, and immediately knew that was, something was up. In the middle of the day, that many birds congregated, that there's bound to be a carcass nearby. So we got all excited, and I started telling the guests, this is incredible, there could be lions on a kill, and we started driving, closer towards it. And I'll never forget it, because the tracker I was working with at the time, an amazing man who sadly passed away during COVID, Richard Koza was my tracker at the time. We pushed on towards the birds, and I hadn't seen anything yet, and I was looking intently everywhere to try and see the carcass, and my gut was telling me there were lions there, and we didn't see anything. And Richard told me to keep going, and he told me to go past the birds. All of these white, and there was a mixture of all the species. There were white-backed vultures, there were Cape vultures, there were lappet-faced, there were hooded vultures. Everybody was there. And so anyway, we drove past them. I didn't even, Richard, he was quite pushy with me in the beginning, because of course I was quite green and he was leading the show. And he said, no, let's keep going, M4, let's keep going. So anyway, we drove past, and then he told me to switch off the car. And he said, right, let's you and I take a walk. I want to go and see what's happened here. So anyway, I explained to the guests, please stay in the vehicle. We'll be back within 15-20 minutes. And Richard and I set off, and we went up onto the bank of the Timbavati River and backtracked towards where these birds were, unfortunately spooking a lot of those birds. But regardless, we kept walking, and I'll never forget the moment where Richard stopped me and said, "M4, what do you see in the river?" And what I'd missed while we were driving, there had been recent floods in the Timbavati River, and there were these big banks of sand with Phragmites reed growing out of it. And what I had missed was a dead rhino sitting on the other side of one of these banks. I was quite low down. Richard sits a little bit higher on his tracker seat, and he had just seen the ridge of the spine of this rhino, and that's why he told me not to stop. So I looked at this dead rhino, and I looked at Richard, and I said, "It's a dead rhino." And he said, "Yeah, let's go have a closer look." And still, nothing was registering in my mind. And we got a little bit closer, and I was literally about 2 yards from this rhino, and could see all the vulture's feathers on the ground, all of their dung, and could see like an open wound on the side of this rhino. Something had fed on it, on its flank, a massive white rhino bull, which had sadly died in the river. And anyway, the scary shock of reality hit me as I flanked the rhino. I came toward its front end and realized that its whole front of its face had been hacked off by poachers. And that was the very first time I'd ever discovered a poached rhino. It was, I think it was March of 2011. And it was when the poaching crisis really had started kicking off in that area. But we hadn't been exposed to it on the reserve where we were. So I wasn't expecting that. That wasn't even in my head. I didn't even think about rhino poaching. And a really, really sad moment where, we then discovered, obviously, that this rhino had been poached. And I walked around this carcass and sort of looked around, and one fascinating thing that I discovered, a slightly weird thing that I discovered, is one of these white-backed vultures had actually died inside the anus of this rhino. Now, of course, a rhino has an incredibly thick hide, and these vultures, particularly the white-backed vultures, don't have the beaks designed for opening up that hide. And this poor bird had got itself stuck inside and died within that rhino. And it's just an amazing thing that has obviously stuck with me ever since. And what I sadly learned after that was how badly I'd actually contaminated that scene, which is something I learned from the section ranger of that area. He was really quite upset with me at the time, and I didn't know this again. We hadn't known about rhino poaching in our area, and he had said to me, "Look, you've completely ruined the scene. There may have been tracks of poachers there. There might have been shell casings of the rifles that were used to poach that particular rhino." I obviously apologized profusely and just claimed ignorance, and from there on had the experience of how to approach what is now a crime scene. But yeah, just a really sad moment, but yeah, amazing to have seen that many birds. I'd never seen that many vultures in one particular area. And we actually never took those guests to that particular scene. I certainly was quite traumatized by it. But we took guests there a couple of days later, and eventually the lions did find that rhino and fed on it. But yeah, quite an interesting story. Right, ad break, I think. We will be back with you all very, very soon. Welcome back, everybody. Really looking forward to our Q&A section of the show tonight, and let's get right into that. Hopefully a number of good questions are coming our way. I've forgotten how I look at questions. Copy. Private link. Clicking on it now. Send lots of questions, please, everybody. Oh no, I don't want to listen to myself. Okay, first question is from Africa Sky. Why are there not ramps in the water reserve, I assume reservoir? That is a very good question and a very good point, and certainly something that we definitely need to invest in putting in that. And it's quite simple, to be honest. I've done it before. You actually just need to put a wooden structure into the waterhole so that things can climb out of there. My team, by the way, is just telling me that I've just given myself a job for tomorrow, and I will gladly accept that job. How do they get poisoned? Betty, what happens is, because of the legal trade in animal parts, what these poachers are doing is they will lace carcasses with poison. I think the most common poison used is a poison called two-step. And so they'll actually shoot an animal or kill an animal and lace it with this horrifically strong poison, and the birds will obviously spot it from way up high, come down and start feeding, and they literally die all around the carcass. That's how fast the poison works. Yeah, it's shocking. Really, really sad. More questions, please, everybody. Send them to me. What's an experience early in your career? Mary, yes. A shocking one. But a valuable one that I certainly learned a lot from. And certainly learned a lot from that man, Richard Causa. who, yeah, as I mentioned, sadly passed away, but an incredible man who taught me a lot about what I know about the bush, particularly with tracking. He was one of the most phenomenal trackers that I've ever worked with, and I miss him dearly. Yes, thank you, Africa Sky. I'll put a photograph on the app of once we have the anti-drowning mechanism installed in the reservoir. Were those rhino poachers ever caught? No, is the answer. Yeah, I think the whole sort of organization of anti-poaching in that area was quite shocked by that particular incident. They reacted really well after that particular incident going forward, and we sadly in the next 14 months lost another 27 rhino on that reserve. It really spiked massively, but we did catch many poachers thereafter with incredible cooperation with the communities, by the way. These communities that surround a lot of these reserves are invested in conservation, thanks to years of efforts with aligning these communities with conservation. So we actually had whistleblowers in these communities who alerted us to these poachers that were working in syndicates in the area, and we did capture a lot of them, which I'm very grateful for, and obviously we continue working with these communities to try and make that happen. All right, everybody, it appears the questions have since dried up, but that's wonderful. Thank you for those who have sent in your questions, who have sent in your pictures, and thank you to everybody that has joined us on tonight's That's Wild show. I've loved it, and I cannot wait for the next one. Enjoy your evening, your day, wherever you may be in the world, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you, everybody.
Admiring the road in front of us, all of this magic. Dun, 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 dun. We're in the bush.
Go for it.
Oh no.
No, do it again. Go for it.
It is so funny.
Medic. Medic.
Problems. Injury on duty.
Oh dear. Oh no.
Too bad it's there to be called off.
Oh no. Everybody go home.
Okay.
That's it.
Cheers, people. Bye.
Bye.